The first crystal note of the orchestra drifted beneath the soaring ceiling like a prayer wrapped in gold. Hundreds of candles shimmered inside towering chandeliers, their warm light dancing across polished marble floors until the entire ballroom of Ravensheir Palace appeared to glow from within. Noble women glided through elegant waltzes in gowns embroidered with pearls and silver thread, while gentlemen in finely tailored coats exchanged polished smiles and political promises. Beyond the tall windows, a gentle summer rain misted the palace gardens, leaving the roses sparkling beneath the moonlight. It should have been the happiest night of the year. Instead, it became the night the palace lost its queen. Duchess Eleanor Ravensheir stood near the center of the ballroom, every bit the image of grace. At only 25 years old, she possessed a quiet beauty that turned heads without demanding attention. Her blush-pink silk gown shimmered with delicate crystal embroidery, while tiny diamonds nestled within her softly pinned auburn curls reflected the candlelight. She wore no extravagant jewels beyond the sapphire necklace her husband had given her on their wedding day, yet she seemed more regal than every woman surrounding her. Her smile, however, had become something she wore for others. Behind every graceful curtsy hid 5 years of silent heartbreak. She heard the whispers as clearly as the orchestra. There she is. The Barren Duchess. Poor Duke Adrian. He deserves an heir. Some voices carried sympathy. Others carried satisfaction. None escaped her ears. She lowered her gaze only briefly before lifting it again with practiced dignity. If pain had taught Eleanor anything, it was that tears should never become entertainment for cruel people. Standing beside her was Duke Adrian Ravensheir. At 36, he was one of England's youngest war heroes and among its most admired noblemen. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a midnight blue military coat embroidered with gold, Adrian possessed the calm confidence of a commander who had survived battlefields most men never returned from. His clean-shaven face remained strikingly handsome, yet tonight an invisible distance separated him from the woman at his side. He loved her. Somewhere beneath years of disappointment, duty, and silence, he still loved her. But hope had slowly withered. Every physician had delivered the same verdict. The Duchess would never bear children. The words had settled between husband and wife like a wall neither knew how to climb. Adrian had never blamed Eleanor. Yet he had stopped knowing how to comfort her. Sometimes silence wounded deeper than cruelty. Eleanor glanced toward him. She longed for him to reach for her hand as he once had. Instead, his attention remained fixed upon the dancers circling beneath the chandeliers. The empty space between their hands seemed wider than the ballroom itself. The orchestra began another waltz. Laughter filled the hall once more. Then the enormous oak doors opened. The music stopped so suddenly that the final violin note echoed through the silence. Every head turned. Lady Vivian Ashcroft entered with slow, deliberate confidence. She was breathtakingly beautiful, dressed in an emerald green gown woven with golden floral embroidery that glittered beneath the chandeliers. Diamonds crowned her carefully arranged curls, while emeralds sparkled around her throat. Cradled gently in her arms slept a newborn wrapped in ivory silk embroidered with the Ravensheir crest. Behind her walked a nurse carrying another infant wrapped in identical blankets. A murmur spread across the ballroom. Twins. The Duke's heirs. Vivian smiled as admiration rippled through the crowd. She walked forward without hesitation. Each step echoed against the marble floor. Every noble instinctively moved aside. Even the orchestra remained silent. Only Eleanor stood perfectly still. Vivian stopped directly before her. The newborns stirred softly. Their tiny hands emerged from the blankets before disappearing again. Vivian lowered her eyes toward Eleanor with triumphant satisfaction. "I gave him heirs," she said softly enough that those nearest leaned closer. Then she lifted her chin. Her voice carried through the ballroom. "What have you given him?" Silence. For one unbearable heartbeat, no one breathed. Then scattered laughter escaped somewhere near the back. Another voice joined. Soon dozens laughed openly. Ladies covered smiling lips behind jeweled fans. Several gentlemen exchanged amused glances. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Perhaps flowers." Another replied. "Not even those." The laughter grew louder. Each cruel sound struck Eleanor harder than any blade. She looked toward Adrian. Surely he would stop this. Surely he would defend the woman who had shared his name for 5 years. Their eyes met. He looked stunned, conflicted, ashamed. Yet no words came. His silence shattered something inside her more completely than Vivian's insult ever could. Eleanor felt tears gathering despite every effort to hold them back. She refused to let them fall. Instead she offered the faintest smile. Not for the crowd. For herself. With graceful composure she slipped her wedding ring from her finger. The diamonds caught the chandelier light one final time. She walked toward Adrian. Without accusation. Without anger. Without raising her voice. She gently placed the ring beside his untouched crystal wine glass. "I pray your heirs bring you every happiness," she whispered so quietly only he could hear. Then she curtsied with perfect elegance. Not a single person moved to stop her. Vivian smiled victoriously. The nobles watched in fascinated silence. Adrian reached toward the ring instinctively. His fingers stopped inches away. "Eleanor." He finally managed. She paused. For one fleeting moment, hope flickered inside his voice. She did not turn around. If she looked back, she feared she would never find the strength to leave. Slowly she continued walking. The massive ballroom doors opened before her. Cool rain-soaked air drifted inside. Outside, the palace steps glistened beneath the storm. No carriage waited. No maid hurried after her. No guards offered escort. The Duchess of Ravensshire descended the long staircase alone while rain soaked her silk gown and loosened the carefully arranged curls around her face. She never looked back. Inside the ballroom no one spoke. The laughter had died. Only the lonely sound of rain striking the palace windows remained. Adrian stared at the tiny wedding ring resting beside his untouched wine glass. For reasons he could not yet understand, the triumph surrounding the newborn twins suddenly felt hollow. Beyond the rain-darkened windows, Eleanor's solitary figure disappeared into the night, carrying with her a secret that neither her husband nor the kingdom had ever been allowed to know. 3 days passed before the palace finally disappeared from Eleanor Ravenshire's memories, though its wounds still lingered inside her heart. She traveled without servants, without jewels, and without announcing her name, exchanging silk chambers for humble inns and lonely roads that stretched across the English countryside. Every mile placed greater distance between her and the ballroom where laughter had echoed louder than loyalty. She no longer wept. Grief had settled into something quieter, a silence that seemed to breathe beside her with every step. Summer skies grew darker each afternoon. By the 4th day, heavy clouds swallowed the sun, and distant thunder rolled across the green hills like cannon fire. Farmers hurried to gather their animals while merchants urged travelers to seek shelter before the storm reached the valley. Eleanor wrapped her soaked cloak more tightly around herself and continued walking. She had nowhere she wished to arrive except somewhere the title of Duchess meant nothing. Rain began gently. Within minutes it became a furious downpour. The narrow country road dissolved beneath rushing water. Branches whipped violently overhead while fierce winds bent ancient oaks until they groaned like old ships caught at sea. Ahead stood an ancient stone bridge spanning the river Ashbourne. Built centuries earlier, it had survived countless winters. Today it looked fragile. The river beneath it no longer flowed peacefully. It roared. Foaming water slammed against the bridge's foundations with terrifying force, carrying uprooted trees, shattered fences, and broken barrels downstream. Several frightened villagers shouted from the opposite bank, "Wait! The bridge isn't safe." But another blast of thunder drowned their voices. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. Remaining where she stood offered no shelter, and darkness approached quickly. Gathering her courage, she stepped onto the weathered stones. The bridge trembled beneath her feet. One step. Another. Then came a deafening crack. Time itself seemed to pause. Massive stones shifted violently. The center arch collapsed. The bridge exploded beneath her. She fell into chaos. Freezing water swallowed her before she could scream. The current struck with unbelievable force, dragging her beneath shattered beams and enormous slabs of stone. Her heavy Victorian gown absorbed water instantly, pulling her deeper into the river's dark embrace. She struggled desperately, reaching toward the pale light above, but another crashing wave spun her beneath floating timber. She could not breathe. She could not see. The river refused to release her. On the riverbank, horrified villagers shouted helplessly. "No one can survive that." At that very moment, hoofbeats thundered across the muddy road. A powerful black horse emerged through the rain. Its rider instantly understood the disaster. Captain Nathaniel Ashcombe reined sharply to a halt. At 38, the former Royal Navy officer carried himself with the calm authority of a man who had faced storms far deadlier than this one. Years of commanding rescue missions at sea had sharpened every instinct within him. He saw only one thing: a woman disappearing beneath the flood. Without removing his boots or military coat, Nathaniel seized a rescue rope from his saddlebag and wrapped it tightly around his waist. Several villagers rushed toward him. "You'll drown." "The current is impossible." He answered with only one sentence. "Hold the rope." Then he ran. With astonishing determination, he leaped from the shattered bridge into the raging river. The water swallowed him instantly. For several terrifying seconds no one saw him. The rope jerked violently, then disappeared beneath the surface. The villagers pulled desperately. Suddenly Nathaniel emerged far downstream, fighting enormous waves while searching frantically around him. A glimpse of pink silk flashed beneath floating branches. He dived again. This time he vanished longer. One woman began praying aloud. Another covered her face. The rope tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. Finally Nathaniel burst above the surface carrying Eleanor against his chest. She hung motionless. Her hair floated like copper ribbons across the water. One arm drifted lifelessly. The current fought to tear them apart. Nathaniel wrapped one arm around her while the other battled the river. Twice enormous tree trunks narrowly missed them. Once both disappeared beneath the water entirely. The villagers hauled with every ounce of strength they possessed. Slowly, painfully, foot by foot, the rope drew them toward shore. Hands reached into the torrent. Several men grabbed Nathaniel. Others lifted Eleanor carefully onto the muddy bank. She remained frighteningly still. Nathaniel immediately knelt beside her. He gently turned her onto her side. Water escaped her lungs. Still she did not wake. He pressed trembling hands against hers. "They're freezing," he murmured. After several desperate moments, Eleanor coughed violently. Air finally rushed into her lungs. Her eyelids fluttered open. The first face she saw belonged not to a nobleman, but to a stranger soaked by rain and river water alike. Nathaniel smiled with quiet relief. "You are safe." She tried to speak. Only a whisper emerged. "Please." He leaned closer. "Please, don't tell anyone who I am." Nathaniel studied her weary eyes. He recognized sorrow far more readily than titles. "You have my word." No further questions followed. He simply offered his hand. Hours later they arrived at Ashcombe House, a peaceful estate resting beside a broad lake surrounded by flowering meadows. Unlike the grandeur of Ravensheir Palace, the estate felt wonderfully alive. Injured veterans laughed together while repairing boats along the shoreline. Children chased butterflies between lavender gardens. Elderly widows baked fresh bread whose comforting aroma drifted through every corridor. No one bowed before Eleanor. No one whispered. No one asked whether she had children. They simply welcomed another weary traveler. For the first time in many years, she slept without fear. Days became weeks. She bandaged wounded soldiers whose scars reminded her that invisible wounds often lasted longest. She read adventure stories to children every evening until they fell asleep smiling. She planted roses beside the lake, discovering quiet joy in watching fragile things bloom again. Nathaniel remained unfailingly respectful. He never questioned her past, never crossed the boundaries of kindness. He simply made certain fresh flowers appeared in her room each morning, and that laughter always found its way into the gardens. One peaceful afternoon, while Eleanor knelt among blooming white lilies, an elderly woman watched silently from beneath an ancient oak tree. Her silver hair rested beneath a simple bonnet. Wisdom filled her gentle blue eyes. Nathaniel approached with quiet reverence. "Lady Beatrice has arrived." The old woman examined Eleanor with surprising attentiveness before softly taking her hands. Her fingers paused over faint scars hidden beneath delicate skin. She looked into Eleanor's eyes for a long moment. Then she smiled with quiet certainty. "My dear child," she whispered, "everyone treated the poison that wounded your body." She gently rested a hand over Eleanor's heart. "But no one treated the hope it stole." Those words echoed through Eleanor's soul like the first ray of sunlight after the longest winter, and for the first time since walking out of the palace, she dared to wonder whether her story had not ended on that rain-soaked ballroom floor after all. Life inside Ravensheir Palace changed almost overnight after Eleanor's departure, though no one dared speak her name aloud. The grand corridors remained polished, the chandeliers still blazed each evening, and servants carried silver trays with the same practiced elegance, yet the castle itself seemed strangely hollow. Laughter echoed through its halls, but warmth had vanished with the woman who had quietly created it. Even the roses she had lovingly tended along the palace gardens began to wilt beneath the relentless summer sun, as though the estate itself understood its mistress had gone. Duke Adrian Ravensheir tried to bury himself in duty. Each morning began before sunrise with estate reports, parliamentary correspondence, and meetings with military officers. He spent long hours reviewing tenant petitions and inspecting the royal stables, convincing himself that work could silence memory. It never did. Every room reminded him of Eleanor. The library still held the novels she loved. The music room remained untouched since she had last played the piano. Fresh embroidery rested unfinished beside the drawing room window where she often waited for him after long council meetings. He noticed things he had never noticed before. A servant's frightened child no longer wandered the gardens laughing. The elderly cook no longer hummed cheerful songs while preparing supper. The palace felt efficient, but it no longer felt alive. Meanwhile, Lady Vivian settled comfortably into luxurious chambers once prepared for honored guests. She delighted in expensive gowns, sparkling jewels, and the admiration of ambitious nobles eager to remain close to the presumed mother of the Duke's heirs. Yet motherhood quickly proved less glamorous than applause. The newborn twins cried throughout the night. Whenever they awakened, Vivian rang for nurses instead of lifting them herself. She complained about sleepless evenings. She frowned whenever their cries interrupted conversations. Servants exchanged uneasy glances. The Duke noticed. One afternoon he entered the nursery unexpectedly. The twins lay crying inside their carved oak cradles while 3 exhausted nurses hurried between them. Vivian sat comfortably near the fireplace reading fashion journals. She barely looked up. "They've been impossible all morning," she sighed. Adrian silently crossed the room. He gently lifted the smaller infant into his arms. Almost immediately the baby settled against his shoulder. The simple moment struck him unexpectedly. A memory surfaced. Years earlier, during a harsh winter, Eleanor had spent 3 sleepless nights caring for the feverish son of the palace stable master. She had refused to leave the frightened child until the fever finally broke. She had never complained. She had never asked for praise. She simply loved. The memory lingered long after he returned the baby to its cradle. Something inside him began quietly questioning everything he had accepted. Several mornings later, unexpected news arrived. The retired royal physician had returned to Ravensshire after months abroad. Dr. Edmund Hawthorne was 73 years old, respected throughout England for his remarkable skill and unwavering honesty. Bent with age but sharp of mind, he had personally cared for 3 generations of the Ravensshire family. He expected to greet both the Duke and Duchess together. Instead he found Adrian alone. "The Duchess sends her apologies?" the old physician asked kindly. Silence answered him. Adrian lowered his eyes. "She left." Dr. Hawthorne frowned deeply. "When?" "Several weeks ago." "And no one has brought her home?" Adrian slowly shook his head. The physician looked genuinely troubled. "My God." Adrian studied the elderly man's face. "You seem surprised." "I believed she would have told you everything before leaving." "Told me what?" The physician stared at him in complete disbelief. "You truly do not know?" A heavy silence filled the study. Outside, rain tapped softly against stained glass windows. Finally the physician spoke. 5 years ago. Adrian immediately recognized the date. Their 2nd wedding anniversary. The grand celebration attended by half the kingdom. The physician continued quietly. "Do you remember the ceremonial toast?" Adrian nodded. "I remember becoming suddenly ill." The physician closed his eyes. "No, Your Grace. You never drank the wine." Confusion crossed Adrian's face. "What do you mean?" The old man drew a slow breath before answering. "Someone poisoned your cup." The words landed like thunder. For several seconds Adrian simply stared. "No. It is the truth." A forgotten memory slowly returned. The crystal goblet. Eleanor suddenly stepping between him and the servants. The sound of breaking glass. Then chaos. Dr. Hawthorne continued. "Her Grace noticed the poison moments before you raised the cup. She pushed you aside. She drank it herself." The room seemed to spin. Adrian gripped the edge of his desk. "Impossible. I watched her collapse." The physician's voice trembled with age and sorrow. "The poison attacked nearly every organ inside her body. For 3 days we believed she would die." Adrian could barely breathe. "I was told she suffered food poisoning. We lied. Because she begged us to." The physician walked slowly toward the window. When she finally regained consciousness, her first question was not about herself. It was whether you had survived. Tears gathered inside the old man's eyes. Then she made every physician present swear an oath. What oath? That you would never learn what she had sacrificed. Adrian's hands began trembling. Why? Because she believed you would spend your life blaming yourself. The physician paused before delivering the cruelest truth. The poison permanently damaged the organs responsible for motherhood. Every sound disappeared. Adrian heard only silence. His heartbeat echoed painfully inside his ears. Dr. Hawthorne gently placed a worn leather journal upon the desk. I kept these records. Inside were pages documenting Eleanor's treatment. Night after night, week after week, descriptions of unbearable pain, fevers, bleeding, prayers whispered while believing death approached. Then another bundle of papers appeared. Medical appointments, receipts, letters. Adrian looked up. What are these? The physician smiled sadly. Hope. For 5 years. Her Grace secretly continued experimental treatments. Every month. Every painful procedure. Every bitter medicine. She refused to surrender. She wanted nothing more than to give you one child. The Duke opened one folded letter. It contained Eleanor's delicate handwriting. If there remains even the smallest chance that one day I might place our child in Adrian's arms, then every pain is worth enduring. Another letter. Please do not tell my husband. I want him to smile because of our child, not because he pities my suffering. Adrian could no longer read. His vision blurred beneath tears he could not stop. He sank heavily into the chair where Eleanor had often waited for him during long evenings. Every memory suddenly transformed. Her quiet smiles. Her tired eyes after mysterious medical visits. The nights she insisted she merely felt unwell. The hope she had carried alone. The ballroom. Vivian's cruel laughter. The silent nobles. The wedding ring resting beside his untouched wine glass. His own silence. He buried his face inside trembling hands. For the first time since boyhood, the Duke of Ravensshire wept openly. Not for losing an heir. Not for palace scandal. But because the woman who had loved him enough to drink death from his cup had walked into a storm believing he no longer wanted her beside him. When his tears finally ceased, Adrian rose with quiet determination unlike anything the palace had ever witnessed. He summoned every steward, every rider, every trusted officer, and ordered the largest search in Ravenshire's history. Horsemen galloped toward distant villages, coastal towns, monasteries, and country estates carrying only one command: find the Duchess. Yet hundreds of miles away, beside a peaceful lake, Eleanor sat beneath blooming roses while Lady Beatrice gently rested a weathered hand upon her wrist, smiled through grateful tears, and whispered words that would change both their lives forever. My dear child, you are going to be a mother. Months passed, and the search for Duchess Eleanor spread across England like a royal decree whispered from village to village. Riders bearing the Ravensshire crest crossed mountain passes, rode along rugged coastlines, and stopped at monasteries, market towns, and quiet country estates. Every messenger carried the same promise from Duke Adrian Ravensshire: whoever found his wife would receive any reward they requested. Yet every rider returned with the same answer: no one had seen the Duchess. To the kingdom, it was as though the gentle young woman had vanished into the earth itself. Back at Ravensshire Palace, the atmosphere changed with each passing week. The celebration surrounding Lady Vivian's newborn twins slowly faded, replaced by uneasy whispers that drifted through servants' corridors and noble drawing rooms alike. The twins were healthy and beautiful, but their cries echoed constantly through the palace. Nurses soothed them through sleepless nights while Vivian spent more time attending lavish dinners than caring for the children she proudly called the Duke's heirs. Adrian noticed everything now. He noticed how Vivian frowned whenever one of the babies interrupted her conversation. He noticed how she never recognized which child preferred to be rocked gently and which settled only after hearing a lullaby. Most painfully of all, he remembered Eleanor. He remembered his wife sitting beside frightened servants' children during outbreaks of illness, reading stories until they smiled again. He remembered finding abandoned kittens wrapped inside her shawl because she refused to leave them shivering in the rain. He remembered how naturally children reached for her arms. The memories became impossible to escape. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing estate accounts inside his study, the palace butler quietly announced that a maid wished to speak privately. Adrian recognized her immediately. Martha had served Eleanor faithfully since the Duchess first arrived as a bride. She had always been fearless, yet today she trembled so violently that she struggled to remain standing. "What troubles you?" Adrian asked gently. Tears filled Martha's eyes. "Your Grace, I cannot carry this burden any longer." Adrian dismissed every servant from the room. Only then did Martha remove a small velvet pouch hidden beneath her apron. "My mistress ordered me to destroy these months ago." With shaking fingers she placed several folded letters upon the desk. They belonged to Lady Vivian. Adrian slowly unfolded the first letter. The elegant handwriting belonged neither to Vivian nor anyone within Ravensheir. The signature read, Count Lucien Beaumont. His eyes narrowed as he continued reading. The words spoke not of politics or friendship, but of secret meetings, forbidden kisses, and promises whispered beneath moonlit gardens months before the twins had been conceived. Another letter described plans to leave England together. Another referred openly to the unborn children as our little miracles. Adrian felt the room grow cold. When did you find these? He asked quietly. The morning after Lady Vivian moved into the palace, Martha whispered. She ordered me to burn them. I tried, but I remembered her Grace's kindness. I could not destroy the truth. Before Adrian could respond, another servant burst into the study. Your Grace, a gentleman has arrived demanding to see Lady Vivian immediately. His name? Count Lucien Beaumont. Silence filled the room. Adrian folded the letters carefully. Bring him to the Great Hall. Minutes later, England's most respected nobles gathered beneath the towering arches of Ravensheir Palace. News traveled quickly whenever scandal threatened a great family. Ministers, judges, neighboring dukes, and influential ladies quietly filled the hall, sensing history was about to unfold. Vivian entered moments later, dressed magnificently in emerald silk, completely unaware of the storm awaiting her. Her confident smile disappeared the instant she saw the foreign count standing near the throne. Lucien Beaumont bowed politely. He was handsome, wealthy, and impeccably dressed, yet anger burned behind his calm expression. You promised me payment, he said coldly. Vivian's face turned pale. You should never have come here. You stopped answering my letters. I owed you nothing. You owed me honesty. The hall fell silent. Adrian stepped forward holding the bundle of letters. Perhaps your ladyship would explain these. Vivian's breathing quickened. Her gaze darted toward Martha. You betrayed me. The maid lowered her eyes but remained silent. Adrian unfolded one letter before the assembled court. His steady voice echoed across the hall as he read Lucien's declaration of love and his joyful anticipation of becoming a father. Every sentence deepened the silence. Every word shattered another piece of Vivian's carefully built deception. Finally Adrian lowered the paper. Are the twins mine? Vivian looked desperately around the hall. No one came to her defense. Even those who had once praised her avoided her eyes. At last she whispered, No. The single word struck the palace harder than thunder. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Some ladies covered their mouths in shock. Several noblemen lowered their heads in embarrassment, remembering the laughter they had shared at Eleanor's expense. Lucien stepped forward. They are my children. I never abandoned them. I refuse to help deceive an innocent woman. Vivian's composure finally broke. I only wanted security, she cried. Without powerful protection I would lose everything. You already have, Adrian answered quietly. His voice carried neither anger nor triumph, only profound disappointment. The judges quickly declared that Vivian had knowingly committed fraud against the Ravensheir family and attempted to deceive the crown regarding succession. Her titles were stripped away. Her estates confiscated. She was sentenced to permanent exile from England. Before guards could escort her away, the enormous palace doors slowly opened. Every head turned. A woman entered wearing a simple pale blue traveling gown instead of royal silk. She carried no jewels except the sapphire necklace Adrian had given her years earlier. Her face appeared softer, healthier. One gentle hand rested protectively over the gentle curve of her stomach. For one breathtaking moment, no one breathed. Duchess Eleanor, someone whispered. Adrian stood frozen. His eyes widened with disbelief. She was alive, and unmistakably pregnant. Vivian stared in horror. The nobles who had once mocked Eleanor instinctively stepped aside as she walked through the hall with quiet dignity. She neither hurried nor hesitated. She approached the cradle where the newborn twins slept peacefully, unaware that the lives surrounding them had changed forever. Everyone expected condemnation. Instead, Eleanor gently lifted the blanket covering the smaller infant. A tender smile touched her lips. So innocent, she whispered. She looked toward the judges. Please, whatever punishment is given today, let no shadow fall upon these children. They committed no crime by being born. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even seasoned judges struggled to hide their emotion. Adrian realized that after every humiliation she had endured, Eleanor's first instinct remained mercy rather than vengeance. His heart broke all over again. He took one hesitant step toward her, then another. But before he could speak, Lady Beatrice entered quietly behind Eleanor and rested a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. Meeting Adrian's stunned gaze, the wise physician smiled gently and said, "Your Grace, before you ask your wife for forgiveness, there is one more truth you must be prepared to hear." The hall fell silent once again, and Adrian understood that the greatest revelation of all had not yet been spoken. Lady Beatrice allowed the silence to linger before speaking again. The elderly physician stepped into the center of the grand hall with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime delivering both sorrow and hope. Every noble watched her. Even the judges leaned forward. Duke Adrian could not take his eyes off Eleanor, whose hand still rested protectively over the gentle curve of her stomach. Lady Beatrice smiled kindly. "Your Grace," she said, "5 years ago every physician believed the poison had destroyed your wife's chance of becoming a mother forever. They were mistaken." The words echoed through the hall. The poison damaged her body beyond anything we had ever treated, but it did not extinguish the last spark of hope. When her Grace came to my estate, she was no longer dying. She was simply carrying wounds no physician had fully understood. She looked toward Eleanor with unmistakable affection. She endured months of painful treatment without complaint. She never asked heaven why she had suffered. She only prayed that one day she might place your child in your arms. Adrian stared at Eleanor in disbelief. You're carrying my child?" Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, but this time they carried joy instead of sorrow. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered. "Every day I wanted to tell you. But after that night in the ballroom, I believed you deserved happiness even if it could never be with me." Adrian closed the distance between them. His knees struck the polished marble floor. Before the entire court, the proud Duke of Ravensshire knelt before the woman he had failed. "I do not deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "When the kingdom laughed at you, I remained silent. When you needed me most, I let my fear speak louder than my love." The grand hall became utterly still. "I cannot erase what I allowed to happen." His eyes filled with tears. "But if you permit me, I will spend every remaining day of my life proving that your sacrifice was never forgotten again." Eleanor looked down at the man she had loved since she was 19. She remembered the young officer who had once ridden through snow simply to bring her the first spring flowers. She remembered the husband who had held her hand through endless nights after physicians declared they would never have children. She also remembered the silence that had shattered her heart. Forgiveness would not come from words alone. She gently reached for his hand. "If we begin again," she said softly, "it must be with truth." Adrian nodded. "No more silence. No more secrets. No more allowing others to speak when I should." A faint smile appeared upon Eleanor's face. For the first time in years, hope returned to both of them together. The judges completed Vivian's sentence. Stripped of every title and privilege, she was escorted from the palace without ceremony. As she passed Eleanor, she lowered her head in shame. "I thought children were enough to make someone worthy," Vivian whispered. Eleanor answered with quiet compassion. "Children are gifts. They are never weapons." Vivian could not meet her eyes. She left the palace forever. Count Lucien Beaumont stepped forward and carefully lifted his newborn twins into his arms. He looked at Eleanor with deep respect. "I will spend my life making certain they know the difference between ambition and love." Eleanor smiled warmly. "They deserve nothing less." The hall watched in silence as the babies disappeared into their father's embrace, their future no longer built upon deception. The following morning Adrian refused to return to ordinary palace life. Instead, he traveled with Eleanor to the peaceful lakeside estate where Captain Nathaniel Ashcombe waited beside the gardens. Nathaniel removed his hat respectfully. "You found her." "I nearly lost her forever," Adrian answered. Nathaniel extended his hand. "Then don't lose her again." The two men shook hands with quiet understanding. There was no jealousy between them. Only mutual respect for the remarkable woman who had changed both their lives. Adrian remained at the estate. He did not command servants. He worked beside villagers. He repaired broken cottages damaged by storms. He carried lumber upon his shoulders. He planted apple trees alongside wounded veterans. He learned the names of every child living on the estate. Every evening he joined Eleanor beneath the lakeside willow where she read stories to children while birds settled across the shimmering water. Slowly trust returned. Not through grand speeches, but through ordinary acts of kindness repeated every day. Lady Beatrice watched quietly from her garden. One afternoon she smiled and whispered to Nathaniel, "Broken hearts heal exactly the way broken bones do. With patience. And with someone willing to remain beside them while they mend." Months passed peacefully. Autumn painted the forest with brilliant gold and crimson. Eleanor's pregnancy flourished. The entire village celebrated each milestone as though the child belonged to them all. Then, one stormy evening, labor began unexpectedly. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Relentless rain flooded every road leading to the estate. A landslide buried the only bridge connecting the village to the nearest town. No doctor could reach them. Only Lady Beatrice possessed the knowledge needed to deliver the child safely. Nathaniel immediately organized the veterans. Some cleared fallen trees. Others strengthened the cottage against fierce winds. Adrian crossed flooded fields carrying blankets, medicines, and hot water despite waist-deep currents threatening to sweep him away. Throughout the long night he never left Eleanor's side. Whenever fear appeared in her eyes, he simply held her hand. "You carried hope alone for 5 years," he whispered. "You will not carry this night alone." Just before dawn, the cries of one newborn echoed through the cottage. Then another. Lady Beatrice laughed through tears. A son. She wrapped the tiny boy carefully before placing him in Eleanor's arms. Moments later she lifted another child. And a daughter. The second cry filled the room with overwhelming joy. Adrian stood speechless. The impossible had happened. The woman everyone had called Barren now held healthy twins against her heart. He knelt beside the bed, unable to stop smiling through tears. "They're beautiful." Eleanor looked at him lovingly. "They're ours." Outside, the storm finally broke. Golden sunrise spread across the lake as though heaven itself celebrated with them. News of the miracle traveled quickly throughout England. Months later the family returned to Ravensshire Palace, not in triumph over enemies but in gratitude for a second chance. The first decree Adrian signed astonished the kingdom. A large wing of the palace would become a permanent nursery and refuge for orphaned infants, abandoned children, and the sons and daughters of fallen soldiers. "No child," he declared, "should ever wonder whether they are loved." The palace soon echoed with joyful laughter instead of lonely silence. Visitors often found the Duke carrying babies through the gardens while Eleanor taught older children beneath flowering trees. The kingdom gradually forgot the cruel nickname that had once followed her. Instead, people began calling her the Mother of the Kingdom. Not because she had finally given birth, but because every child who entered the palace felt loved the moment she smiled. 1 year later the annual summer royal ball returned. The same chandeliers sparkled. The same orchestra played. The same ballroom stood waiting. Only this time no whispers filled the air. Instead, every noble rose to welcome the Duke and Duchess together. Adrian gently took Eleanor's hand before the entire court. He kissed it with unmistakable pride. Then he turned toward the assembled kingdom. "The day someone asked what my wife had ever given me," he said, "I was too blind to answer." He looked lovingly at Eleanor, then at their sleeping twins resting nearby. "Today I know the truth. She gave me my life when death reached for me. She gave me hope when despair became easier. She gave me these precious children. But greater than all of that, she gave me back my soul." Thunderous applause filled the grand hall. As the orchestra began a graceful waltz, Adrian led Eleanor onto the ballroom floor where their story had once been broken. This time there was no laughter born of cruelty, only admiration born of truth. Beneath glittering chandeliers, surrounded by their children, loyal friends, and a kingdom forever changed by compassion, they danced together while the palace that had nearly destroyed their love finally became the home where it would live for generations to come.